Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of March of 2023. And of course, the most important piece of news is that International Court in Hague issues arrest warrant for Putin. This is another episode of war of humiliations, another episode from the United States of America when they were trying to humiliate Putin in front of entire world. This is another goal, and this is the reply or answer to the Russian event that when they were shut down the NATO drone. So this is the answer, and that answer came very fast. To tell the truth, it was very fast. So I believe that we will discuss this another episode of humiliation war in the next videos. But this episode is we will discuss the situation on the ground. So let's start, and first we are going to start Bakhmut, of course with Bakhmut, because Bakhmut one of the most important town, and the Russians are trying to encircle this town since the beginning of I believe the May or June of the previous year, as soon as Popasna fell, and we still see that the Russians are pushing, but they still haven't established encirclement of that town. Yes, there is an operational encirclement, maybe there is a tactical encirclement, maybe there is even a cauldron, but we see that there are still roads that Ukrainians under fire, under artillery shelling, are still able to use to supply and support the forces that located inside of Bakhmut. And let's try to analyze, let's try to understand what exactly the Russians faced in Bakhmut. What stopped them? What did stop them in this situation? What is the problems and what is the issues? And the main issues, since in vicinity of Bakhmut and the battle for Bakhmut, is hills. Yes, hills, the highlands, the difference between the Russian position and position where we can find Ukrainian forces, and for better understanding of the difference between the distance, the difference between the levels of between Russians and Ukrainians, we can find on this map. So this is Bakhmut. I believe that maybe it's very difficult to understand where is where, but for example, this cross, this one is the cross between Berkhovka, Krasnaya Gora, Yahidne and Podgorodnya. So this is the area, so we can say that if you it's difficult for you to coordinate yourself, you can start from this cross that's located on the right side of this map. Let's return back to the Western Sources map, and this is the cross we are talking about. This is the area. So as you can see, according to this map, you see that the red colored, the territory of that map that colored with red, it means that this is the high position of this territory, and the green one, yellow one, and everything that goes to the blue is the lowland. So as you can see, according to this map, the Russians controls every single square meter of the lowland in this territory. And when talking about the Ukrainians, they control the highest positions in this area. The Russians control just a few hills. One of these hills is located in the vicinity of Zaliznyanskaya. Let's go to the Institute of Study of War map. We discussed this hill for many times, and let's zoom in and let's take a look at this hill. So this hill is located, this one, 241 meters, and this hill is under Russian control. But every single hill that located on the west is under Ukrainian control, and this is a pretty powerful benefit for them. So this is the reason why the Russians are so slow. It doesn't mean that the Russians are not able to penetrate, to take control over these territories. The main problem is that the Russians can't see the Ukrainian forces position from their eyes. So they need or to use drones. The Russians need to use the only thing, drones. This is the only weapon that the Russians are able to use if they want to see their enemy, because when talking about the Ukrainians, they have perfect possibilities to attack the Russians from hidden positions. So let's say the Ukrainians have their positions on the red area on the east, let's say from these bridges, let's say, and they can establish their artillery systems on the west from this channel, and to attack the Russians without even seeing them. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are able to use tanks for these purposes, because the Ukrainian forces that located in Grigorievka and Bogdanovka and Minkovka and Orekhovo-Vasilivka are able to coordinate the Ukrainian forces, and they can attack from the hidden positions. And this is the most weakest Russian position in this situation. So that's why they're so slow. But it doesn't mean that the Russians are not able to penetrate this area. They're able to do this. The only problem that the Russians have, and why they're stuck, or at least they were forced to slow a little bit down, the thing is that they need to move artillery as close as possible to the front line. They need to move artillery. They need to get artillery as close as possible. Maybe like, let's calculate from Grigorievka. I don't think that the Russians need to attack Grigorievka. They need to attack bridges. So let's say the Russians need to get artillery right exactly to Krasnaya Gora. So from positions of Krasnaya Gora, the Russians are able to establish physical fire control over these channels, and this will reduce the supply and support possibilities of Ukrainians. The Bogdanovka and Grigorievka will be cut off completely, and after that the Russians are able to push further. But don't forget that there are a lot of manpower in these two towns, and this is not an easy thing to do. It will take time, it will take days, and if the Ukrainians know what they do, it can take months to establish control over this territory. So the battle for Bakhmut hasn't ended. There are still a lot of things to do. Furthermore, if we take a look at the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, they reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. But there is important thing about the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. The thing is that usually the Russians, when they're trying to give a report, they give a number, they include towns and the areas where there were offensive operation, artillery attacks, or air forces attack. And today the Russians reported that as a result of active clashes, of active storm operation, as a result of artillery attack, as a result of air force attack, in the vicinity of the settlements like Semyonovka, Petrovska, and Toninka, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers. If we take a look at this map, you won't find these towns in this area. There is Bandarная, Привилье, Меньковка, Grigorievka, Орехово-Васильевка, Ivanovska, but there are no towns by the name of Semyonovka, Petrovska, and Toninka. So where are these towns where the Russians had the main activity during the previous 24 hours? And these towns are located in the vicinity of Avdiivka. So there is a Toninka, and let's go to the Russian sources map, and we're gonna see that this map haven't even established Orlovka. So these towns where the Russians were active are not even in the vicinity of Bakhmut. I'm trying to say that the Russians took a small operational pause in the vicinity of this town. So they now to solve the issues with artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, they managed to shut down just 2 artillery systems from the Ukrainian side. So yes, if you take a look at this map, you're going to see a lot of arrows showing that there is a progress on the north, on the south, in the direction of channel Bogdanovka, in direction of Hromova, but we see these arrows yesterday, the day before yesterday. Yes, maybe you don't like to hear this, and there are nothing bad in this piece of news. The Russians in the vicinity of Bakhmut took a small operational pause. And this operational pause mainly connected with the thing that they need to move artillery system as close as possible to Berkhovka and Krasnaya Gora, and then they need to suppress the enemy's artillery system or the Ukrainians in the vicinity of all these towns, and after that they are able to complete their operation of encirclement. I think that maybe the previous 24 hours was enough for this, but tomorrow we need to follow the report of Ministry of Defense. They will give us more numbers, we will be able to analyze them, and we will be able to understand whether the Russians restored their offensive operation or there are still no progress and they took a decision to slow down and to understand what they're going to do next. Because one more time, the Russians control just lowland, and believe me, I haven't been on the front line ever, I haven't been on the combat line ever, but I believe that it is very difficult to establish control over the hill. When there are NATO weapons, NATO soldiers, we can call the Ukrainians as a NATO soldiers, where there are a lot of weapons and so on, I don't think so. So the Russians don't want to lose their soldiers, and they need to find an idea, they need to find a solution how to move further. So we'll see. But as you can see, there are like icons in this area, and to tell the truth, the Russians do have some progress, and they're saying that even if we take a look at the Russian sources map, that they have a progress in the vicinity of Grigorivka, and we know that they established at least control over 2 hills in this area. Let's return back to the Institute of Study of War map. They control 241 meters hill, and they control the hill near Dubovo-Vasilievka, and they're saying that 200 meters, so it's somewhere between Grigory-Vasilievka and between Grigorovka and Dubovo-Vasilievka. So they are somewhere there. They need some time. Just give them some time. They can't do everything. It's very dangerous and very risky. They need to save the manpower, and after that they are able to do everything. Now let's move further, and let's move to Avdiivka. As you can see, there are also a lot of updates. The Russians are saying that they were attacking this area, trying to bomb this area with artillery. More and more sources are saying that entire Krasnogorovka is under Russian control, but we still haven't received a lot of video and photo confirmation. We know that when talking about Wagners, when they establish control over this or that settlement, they're showing the picture in the vicinity of the entrance of the town, somewhere nearby, some statues or so on, or some buildings, important town halls. But we received dozens of updates about the establishing control over Krasnogorovka, but we still haven't received even a single photo confirmation near any town. So that's why I believe that this is the reason why the Russian source map is not updated. Furthermore, you know what, that when talking about Krasnogorovka, this town used to be under Russian control during the first phase of special military operation in 2022. There were a lot of evidence, a lot of confirmation that the Russians were able to enter that town as a result of clashes, tanks attacks, but later the Ukrainians made a counter-offensive operation and they pushed the Russians back. So I'm not surprised why the Russians are not updating this map, because it's not enough just to announce about taking this town. Of course, you need to hold this town as long as possible. You need to keep the area under your control. So maybe I believe that this is the reason why the Russian source map is not updated. But when talking about the Western source map, we see that this town is 100% under complete Russian control. And anyway, we can say that Avdiivka is already in operational encirclement. As we discussed yesterday, there are still a lot of ammo depots, a lot of ammo shell that Ukrainians that located inside of Avdiivka are able to use to hold this area. I believe they are able to hold this area for months, maybe not even 1, maybe 2, 3, or even half a year. I believe so. Believe me, the Ukrainians had a lot of experience after the Mariupol battle. They understand perfectly what they need. So I believe that during the previous year, the Ukrainians managed to move as much as possible of supply inside this town, and they will hold this area as long as possible and as long as it needed. But of course, the Russians, the only problem that these forces are no longer able to do normal military rotation. Of course, soldiers can be tired, there can be wounds, might be wounded soldiers and so on. And I believe it's not very good to feel in being encircled. Furthermore, if you know that during the previous months you were attacking Donetsk and shelling and killing civilians. So to realize and to understand that you are encircled by the Russians and you don't have any possibility to evacuate, and you understand that this is your last battle and that there are very low chances that you are going to evacuate from this area, is not a very good thing for these soldiers. But from the other side, there are a lot of Ukrainians, and they understand that they need to fight till the end, because they understand they don't have any other options. They were attacking, shelling and Donetsk, and there were a lot of casualties among civilians in this town. There will be no mercy for these soldiers, believe me. But let's wait and let's see what is going to be next. When talking about South Donetsk area, as you can see, the Russians are trying to push, trying to understand, trying to realize what exactly is happening. Furthermore, the Ukrainians started their counter-offensive operation all over the front line. It's some kind of recos in combat when they are trying to understand, realize the Russian position, their weak places, weak sides, weak parts of the front line. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on the South Donetsk and Zaporozhye front line, the Ukrainians lost 65 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems D-20. Not much, the regular thing, the regular routine on this front line, nothing special. When talking about Kherson, the same picture, but the thing is that the Russians, as you can see, there are continue effective artillery duels. And one more time, if we update this map for months updates, you're gonna see that the numbers of icons is significant on this front line. Just imagine yourself the escalation and the force and the number of attacks of operations that both parts took in this area. As you can see, the Ukrainians mainly are trying to attack the Russian forces very far from the front line. They're trying to suppress and to attack the main roads. And when talking about the Russians, they're trying to attack the bank of this river where the Ukrainians have accumulated their forces. To tell the truth, I don't understand the Ukrainian tactic, why they're trying to accumulate their forces along the bank. They're doing something as if we can say that maybe they're afraid of the Russians will try to cross the river and to return back control. Believe me, at least at this phase of special operation, the Russians are not going to do this. But somehow, maybe the reason why the Ukrainians are trying to accumulate and collect their force along the bank of the river because of a significant number of operations that Ukrainians are doing these days, attempts to cross the river, and we know that recently there was another attempt of crossing this river, and the Ukrainians, as you can see, there was a attempt. There's like islands in the south of Kherson. They were trying to cross to move their soldiers, but as you can see, there are a lot of pictures of killed and wounded Ukrainians, and that attack was repulsed. And later, the Russians attacked this area with artillery. Furthermore, there are a lot of updates of redeploying and movements of significant number of armored vehicles in this area. So something interesting is happening there. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, 12 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, Grad and Akatsiya. And there is one important Kupyansk front line. It's the last but not the least. And the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were attacking Dvoriechne, Berestova, as usual, Stelmakhovka, Novoselovskaya. The Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers and 3 armored vehicles. So as you can see, the level of losses were reduced till the minimum level since the beginning of this maybe special operation, since the beginning of the opening of this front line. So it tells a lot. For example, the Ukrainians are saying that there are the most powerful and most experienced Russian army on the Kupyansk and Liman front line we see. So there is there is a piece of news, there is a piece of information from the Ukrainian side where they're saying that when talking about Kupyansk front line, there is one of the most powerful and experienced army. And we see the results that the Ukrainians lost just 40 soldiers. We see that maybe the Russians waste this army, their skills and experience in for nothing, because maybe would be better to redeploy these forces somewhere else, or at least to start some active clashes, because no matter how experienced forces are, they need to have trainings all the time. And when talking about Liman, the level of the losses of the Ukrainian soldiers is 70 soldiers per the previous 24 hours. So as you can see, the Russian activity on this front line has been reduced as well. And it is very difficult to analyze the data for the previous 24 hours. We see that there is some kind of flag saying that there are no progress. The level of losses is very low. So that's mean that the Russians could took small operational pause, or maybe the Russians haven't managed to calculate their losses correctly, and tomorrow we are going to see completely the different numbers. We need to see. But if we are able to see the same numbers in a row, that means that Russian commanders took an important and, let's say, very important decision to change the tactic on this or that front line. Furthermore, if you remember, before that, one more time, some sources are saying that Ukraine started redeploying their forces from border with Belarus in direction of the combat line on Donbass front line. I don't know why they're doing this. We know that during the previous months, the Ukrainians were creating few lines of defense. There are a lot of minefields in this area. Maybe they understand that there is nothing to be afraid of, and maybe there is some kind of underground, news, let's call it like this, negotiations between the president of Belarus and Putin and many other countries, and maybe there is some kind of agreement not to involve other countries inside the Ukrainian conflict, but the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy their force from the border with Belarus in direction of Donbass. And this is another important update. And the most important update, if you remember, somewhere in February, exactly at the same time where the Russians developed significant success in the vicinity of Bakhmut, I told you my projection was that somewhere in the end of March, the Russians, according to my understanding of the situation, should start their mobilization process. And not because of like feelings or another speculation or something like this. I told you that there is a uniform. And in the beginning of April, the Russians changed their uniform from winter to spring. And I told you that exactly at this moment, according to normal understanding of situation, the Russians need to start another wave of mobilization. They need to understand what exactly they are able to afford themselves. And maybe you heard, maybe you haven't heard, but more and more parts, regions of Russian Federation, more and more people publishes a lot of piece of information, a lot of updates, that they start receiving like some kind of applications. And the Russian military authorities are saying that they're trying to check the list of people who live here or there, trying to understand whether these people are, and to calculate and create a list of possible mobilization. Reading quotes, we understand that the Russians don't want to have panic, they don't want to raise the voice of this situation. So, but anyway, according to everything we discussed, as we understand together, the Russians have already started preparation before the next greatest of mobilization. If you ask me, I believe that this is the spring period of time, and the Russians have few options. Or they are going to mobilize small amount of soldiers, or let's say 100,000, let's say 300,000, and let's say 500,000 soldiers. If you ask me, I would announce about 500,000 mobilization, even if I am able to mobilize just 50,000. Imagine, I would announce 500,000 even if I'm able just to now mobilize 50, so 10 times less. Why? I need to break the spirit of my opponent, of my enemy. So that's why. So imagine yourself, there are soldiers in the trenches who knows that the situation is difficult, and the Ukrainians, most of the Western sources are saying, and Ukrainian sources are saying, that the Russians are winning not just because of the superiority in artillery and air forces. They're saying that they're winning because of endless waves of attacks with the soldiers. And imagine yourself, the soldiers in trenches, they see these endless waves of Wagnerians who are attacking them every single second, and they don't give them just to drink even a cup of coffee. And now they understand that another 500,000 of Russians is going to be deployed on the territory of Ukraine within the few months. I think that it's the nightmare for the Ukrainians. And one more time, even if I am able to mobilize 50,000, I would announce about 500,000 mobilization to ruin the spirit of Ukrainians completely. And of course, it's not just about the Ukrainians. This announcement will help to the Russian forces on the trenches to understand that something is doing, that the authorities, military are doing something, they're thinking about them, and they understand that there are going to be more and more soldiers. And of course, the best thing that soldier in trenches can see, that soon there are going to be a lot of like him, sitting with him shoulder to shoulder, and if to die, at least not to die alone, but with brothers and something like this. So, or to storm, or not obviously to die, but to do some offensive operation or something like this. So anyway, the more army, this better situation is. And this about the situation on the ground. I believe that very soon, I hope that tomorrow I'm going to provide you another video about the air forces, because I believe that no matter who is going to win the war, the battle for the south of Ukraine, no matter who is going to win the battle for Bakhmut, no matter what the Chinese are saying about peace agreement, I believe that this year we are going to see a real battle between F-16 with the Russian Su-35 or even Su-57. This is going to be amazing, and I believe that we need to be prepared before the significant battle of the most powerful airplanes in the world, from the Chinese, from the Russian side, and from the NATO side. I hope that within the next few days I will be able to prepare the video about the Ukraine Air Forces, about supplies and so on. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.